As you know, one of the biggest arguments against us is there's a consensus. As though this was some kind of an argument. Can we all practice that? There's a consensus. Now, Aristotle, 2,350 years ago, some of you are old enough to remember, actually said that argument from consensus was a species of feeble-mindedness known as a logical fallacy, one of the commonest logical fallacies in human discourse. But the fact is that there may be a consensus, and we're going to check that now by doing an experiment, and Diane is going to help with this. And I'm going to ask you half a dozen questions. Here is the first question, and Diane is going to read it out to you.
Does climate change?
Right, hands up all those who do not think that climate changes. Diane is going to tell me how many people don't think climate changes.
No hands.
So we have, ladies and gentlemen, 100% consensus that climate changes. Cook et al. 2013, eat your hearts out. Now then, read this one out too, number 2.
Has the atmospheric concentration of CO2 increased since the late 1950s?
Right, hands up all those who do not think that the concentration of CO2 has gone up since the 1950s. Diane, how many hands?
No hands whatsoever.
Another 100% consensus. Go on to question 3.
Is man likely to have contributed to the measured increase in atmospheric CO2 concentration since the late 1950s?
Hands up all those who disagree with that proposition.
No hands.
No hands. Number 4.
Other things being equal, is it likely that adding CO2 to the atmosphere will cause some global warming?
Anybody disagree with that? No. No hands again.
No hands.
Number 5.
Is it likely that there has been some global warming since the late 1950s?
Anybody disagree that there's been warming since the late 50s?
No
Once
hands.
again, no hands. Very good.
Is
And
it
this is the last
likely?
one.
Good. Is it likely that man's emissions of CO2 and other greenhouse gases have contributed to the measured global warming since 1950?
Anyone disagree with that? Once again, no hands. Now, you may say, why have I bothered to ask these actually fairly crass questions, which are an insult to your intelligence? That is because we are all too frequently accused of not accepting any of those points. And I wanted it to be made absolutely plain to those who are watching this from afar that we are not climate change deniers. We do not deny that climate changes. We do not deny that CO2 is increasing or that we are somehow responsible for some of that. We don't deny, therefore, that we could be causing some global warming. So get that clear. Climate skeptics are not skeptical of the things we're accused of being skeptical of. But look at the results of this survey of 11,944 papers in the scientific literature published between 1991 and 2011, a period of 21 years. They said that 97% agreed that humans are causing global warming. In fact, they say we are the cause. We would say, the only difference is we would say we are a cause. But we have 100% consensus. Now, what I want to do is to have a little closer look at this particular survey. I've nearly finished with you, so don't worry, you're doing very well. Isn't you doing well, ladies and gentlemen? She had no prior notice of this, and I think you've stood up very well under this onslaught. Now, on the slide that you see there now, you will see 3 separate definitions of consensus. The first one, that humans can be causing some warming, is the definition of consensus that all of us agree with. We have 100% consensus, they only have 97%. Now, the next definition of consensus is that most of the recent global warming since roughly 1950 was caused by us. Now, on that, I suspect there would be much less unanimity in this room because we do not know what fraction of the warming since 1950 was caused by us. And yet, when Cook et al. Reported their results, they said that they had found a 97% consensus to the effect that most of the warming since 1950 was caused by us. That was their definition of consensus. It is the same as the IPCC's definition of consensus. It's the official definition of the climate consensus that we are responsible for most of the warming since 1950. Now, I'm not going to ask you your views on that because as good scientists, you don't have one. It might or might not be true. But let us therefore look at how they managed to present what is actually a 0.3% consensus in the reviewed literature on that question as a 97.1% consensus. The first thing is they eliminated 2/3 of all the papers they were looking at on the grounds that they hadn't expressed an opinion. Now, that is not normally how these surveys are done, but that's what they did. They knocked those out. Then they congregated together 3 levels of endorsement, only one of which was the majoritarian endorsement that most of the warming since 1950 was caused by us. They lumped that with the explicit or implicit endorsement of the consensus that we all agree with, that maybe we have contributed some warming and we don't know how much. They put all those together, and by conflating these 2 completely different definitions of consensus, they claimed there was this consensus of 97.1% that most of the warming since 1950 was caused by us. They said so in their paper, and they said so in a subsequent paper commenting on their paper. And it was only when my good friends David Leagates, Willie Soon, and Matt Briggs and I got together, did the math, and published a paper in Science and Education showing what the true figure was that the truth began to emerge.